This is Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app. Now, live from the Matt Black Kia Studios.
Oh, what a move!
Here's Josh Hennig.
Jim Schwartz speaks to the media, and, well, his defense had a good game, but he didn't have a good media day. That's a bit of an understatement of the day. NBA Finals continue tonight. Baseball back in action. How about those Braves shutting down the Marlins? I guess the Derek Jeter aura didn't rub off enough on the Miami Marlins. I mean, they just choked that game away today to the Braves. Just like the Phillies bullpen would have. They would have made the playoffs. Game night here on 97.3 ESPN. PlaySugarHouse.com. Text board is open. 609-403-0973. Speaking of the NBA Finals, we'll be joined by Brandon ScoopB Robinson, NBA Insider, coming up about 18 minutes from now to get into Doc Rivers, next Sixers head coach. Now what? You still have an entire offseason before you got to play again. Doc Rivers, how does it help the 76ers moving forward as well as the Houston Astros bombed the home run thanks to George Springer? How about them apples? Astros looking all right in this game. A little disappointing for me because I'm a bit biased to the A's. I like the A's and the Padres. I like the young guys out west, but that's just me. So we got a lot to get into throughout the show again. PlaySugarHouse.com. Text board is open. 609-403-0973. We didn't get a lot to this yesterday because of the fact that a lot of you took some umbrage. Some of you took some concern. Some of you took some questioning to my verbiage of how I described Carson Wentz and Doug Peterson's play on Sunday night. But that's okay because we still got Tuesday to talk about it. And it's a perfect day to get to this because I wanted to talk about the defense, right? I wanted to get into how the defense showed up for the second straight week. See, in the NFL, we don't always realize because maybe not we, but there's a lot of Eagles, Sixers, Flyers, Phillies fans who don't get a chance to watch the rest of the league, right? You know, you're so focused on your team, and you got lives, you got jobs, you got other interests in your life, so you're not dialed into the rest of the league, and that's fine. That's not that I'm not blaming you. It's a part of life. But if I tell you that across the league, the majority of the average of a team's allowing points is usually around 20 to 23 points, you would say, all right. And if I were to tell you that before this season, the Philadelphia Eagles were at worst top 15 in the NFL in points allowed per game, you think that's all right. 2 straight weeks now, Jim Schwartz's defense showed up to play after being embarrassed by the Rams. And Jim Schwartz said it himself, how we handle adversity, how we respond to adversity will make a difference for us. And they have. The Philadelphia Eagles now, in back-to-back weeks, they 18 quarterback hits on Joe Burrow, 15 quarterback hits on Nick Mullins/CJ Beathard. But I still hear some of you wanting to blame Schwartz. And we're going to get into blaming Schwartz in just a minute because he did say something today that I think deserves criticism. But I first want to get the positives out of the way. I feel like this should be a 30 for 30 special from ESPN. What if I told you that Jim Schwartz's defense has the most sacks in the NFL? What if I told you that Jim Schwartz's defense was 8th in the NFL in quarterback pressures? What if I told you that Jim Schwartz's defense gets to the quarterback 26% of the time? That's top 10 in the NFL. But yet there's a contingent of you out there who are obsessed with saying Jim Schwartz needs to blitz more. Jim Schwartz is an idiot. Jim Schwartz's defensive scheming is horrible. It's not horrible. He's not an idiot. And those of you who say that, you sound ridiculous. Is Jim Schwartz the best defense coordinator in the NFL? No. That honor goes to Bill Belichick. And if anybody wants to argue with me with that, I'm game. Let's go. I'm not afraid of any of you who think Bill Belichick's not a great defense coordinator. Watch the Chiefs game last night. They almost beat the Chiefs. if it wasn't for a bad call and the fact that their quarterbacks were Brian Hoyer and Jared Stidham. Heck, I'd take Trubisky over those guys. I mean, good grief. That was disgusting last night. But anyway, back to Jim Schwartz. Jim Schwartz is not the worst defensive coordinator. He's not horrible. He's not an idiot. Does he play a style of defense that is not aesthetically pleasing at times? Yes. The bend it but don't break defense is not aesthetically pleasing. And it lends you to think that the defense is not playing as well as it is. But the results are evident. If you're doing this well in sacks and quarterback pressures, then Jim Schwartz is not a bumbling buffoon. The defense has done their job the last 2 weeks. And I love the question that was asked on the Sports Bash earlier today when Mike Gill and Hunter Brody asked Andrew DeCecco, do this defense need to carry them this year, considering how beat up and injured the offense is? It's an excellent question, and it's an important question. Because when you look at the Eagles' offense, at sometimes it's hard to know who is at fault for what on that offense. Is it Doug Peterson? Is it Carson Wentz? Is it the coaches around Peterson? It's hard to put your finger on it. But at least on the defense, we know if there's someone to blame or if there's someone that deserves praise, we know who to point to, we know where it goes, and that's a good thing. At least there's some simplicity on this football team. When you lead the NFL in sacks and you're 8th in the league in quarterback pressures and you're getting to the quarterback 26% of the time, I don't understand the desire that you need to blitz more. No, it's that Jim Schwartz runs a defense that is not aesthetically pleasing. It's not Buddy Ryan's defense. It doesn't have the creativity of a Belichick. It's just very simple. And the defense being simple is what lends it to success and lends it to failure as well. Let's not forget, Jim Schwartz got chewed up and spit out by Tom Brady in the Super Bowl. Yeah, he had 2 great games before that. They shut down the Falcons, and they forced a ton of turnovers against the Vikings. But they got ripped up by Tom Brady. Now, some of you may say, well, it's Tom Brady. Of course, he's going to rip you up. Yeah, but not to that number. That was a lot. Because Belichick talked with Josh McDaniels and told him how to expose Jim Schwartz's defense because, oh, by the way, the man that gave Jim Schwartz his first job in the NFL is Bill Belichick. So if anybody's going to know the head of Jim Schwartz, it's going to be Belichick. So, of course, a Belichick team ripped him apart. But the last 2 weeks, the defense stepped up. The defense got it done. Brandon Graham's had a couple great weeks. Malik Jackson overall has had a very good year. Derek Barnett probably had his best game of his Eagles career, of his Eagles life, on Sunday night. Gerard Avery, on 15 snaps, had 5 quarterback hits. That means 33% of the time he was getting to the quarterback. He was responsible for a chunk of those quarterback pressures I'm talking about. So I think on one hand, we need to give Jim Schwartz more credit. Now, on the flip side, we all know anybody who watches enough football, anybody who has enough of an understanding of the game of football, knows that the Eagles' linebacker situation is a problem. It's a concern. And when Jim Schwartz was asked about the guy who gets the largest amount of vitriol from Eagles fans, Schwartz had an interesting answer. And this is where he deserves criticism. This is the arena, this is the part of him being a coordinator that deserves some criticism. Take a listen.
Nate's been a very solid player for us and has helped us win a lot of games. And I would just caution this. There's probably a lot of plays that people outside of our building think might be his fault, that he just happens to be the closest guy when someone else made a mistake. And I think they end up blaming him a lot of times. You know, he's sort of the closest guy to some plays. And, that's just sort of the way the ball bounces. We just need to be more efficient overall.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. So as you just heard, I spent about 7 minutes defending Jim Schwartz and the Eagles defense. Now I'm going to take the next few minutes to tell him how he's wrong. I understand Jim is sticking up for his guy. I understand that Jim doesn't want to throw his players under the bus. But to get up there in front of the media and say, Nate has done a lot of good things for us, and that there's a lot of times people outside of this building see certain things and they think it's his fault when it's not his fault. Well, Jim, the problem is that in your saying that Nate Gary on certain plays, it's not his fault, that means it's somebody else's fault. That means that the plays that the fans are watching and saying the linebackers are not very good, Nate Gary can't do this, the Eagles defense can't do that. That means that when people are criticizing Gary and the defense, even if it's not Nate's fault, even if Nate Gary isn't directly responsible for a mistake, even if Nate Gary is not the culprit on a specific play that you are pointing to, what you're saying, Jim, is that somebody else messed up. So at the end of the day, even if it's not Nate Gary making the mistake, still somebody failed on the play. It's still a failure by somebody on your defense to get the job done. And Nate Gary's supposed to be the quote-unquote veteran of a defense that includes a linebacker core, that includes TJ Edwards, Duke Riley, Alex Singleton, Davion Taylor, a bunch of young guys. He's supposed to be the so-called most experienced guy. So it should be on Nate Gary to help coach up the guys on the field. The problem is that how does Jim end it? He ends that point and says, we just got to play more efficiently overall. So what you're really telling us, Jim, is that Nate Gary's not as bad as we all think he is, but somebody else is making Nate look bad. That's what you're really saying. And that in and of itself is kind of ridiculous. Like I said, Jim Schwartz, he deserves credit when he gets something right. But he deserves a little, criticism when he does something wrong. You can't tell me that Nate Gary is so innocent on these plays, and that just happens to be somebody else messing up. I think that's a bit too general. It's a bit too basic in an answer. Now, as I said, Schwartz is not going to throw his guys under the bus. He's not that kind of coach. He's not Bruce Arians. He's not going to come out and lay it into somebody in the media. It's not his style. But Jim has to be honest with himself and everybody else about one thing. The defense has failed at times on specific plays. He said it himself in the press conference. There was nothing we could do to stop George Kittle on Sunday night. So what you're admitting is that your team is not equipped to stop a top-tier tight end. Now, there's only a handful of top-tier tight ends in the league, but you saw what Tyler Eifert did, and he's not even a top 5 tight end in the league. What you're saying is that there is a specific flaw in your defense. And by saying that the defense has to play more efficiently, by saying that Nate Gary is not always at fault for those plays and somebody else missed an assignment, and that he just happens to be the closest person left over, what you're saying is that your defensive personnel, that your group of defenders are not good enough. So really, at the end of the day, Jim Schwartz indirectly is telling you two things. He's indirectly telling you, number one, that somebody else on a defensive play failed, making Nate Gary look bad. So somebody else couldn't do their job. And number two, what he's telling you is that Howie Roseman in the Eagles front office of Andy Weidel and company didn't hand him good enough players to handle these tight ends. So yeah, I got to give you credit for holding them the points. 20 points, 2 straight weeks. Give him credit for leading the NFL in sacks. Give him credit for being top 10 in quarterback hits and quarterback pressures. But Jim, you said it 2 weeks ago. It's on you to coach these guys up in a position to be successful. Kind of falls on you to do that with the linebackers, does it not? Game night here on 97.3 ESPN. Josh Hennig hanging out with you. The PlaySugarHouse.com text board is open at 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation. The PlaySugarHouse.com text board. Place your legal sports bets at PlaySugarHouse.com. Sign up now. The match your first deposit up to $250. Must be 21 or older to play. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. 609-403-0973 is the text board. We'll get into some Sixers and the NBA Finals coming up next with Brandon ScoopB Robinson here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app, powered by First Bank of Sea Isle City.
You're listening to Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Text board is open, 609-403-0973. We'll get to your texts just a little bit later in the show on the PlaySugarHouse.com text board, 609-403-0973. Right now, we'll take a little break from the Eagles NFL talk. Sixers hire Doc Rivers. NBA Finals resumes tonight. What does it all mean? The one and only Brandon ScoopB Robinson joins us right now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, NBA Insider. Make sure you're following on Twitter at ScoopB on Twitter. Also check out the ScoopB Radio podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. My friend, how you doing today?
Like I told you before we came back from 45 seconds in the break, I'm blessed, man. Basketball is on, sports is on, and I'm energized because you put on Jay-Z's Rock Boys coming out of the break. That is one of my favorite songs by the one and only Sean Carter. So I'm even more energized.
Well, I'm glad I could help you out there. How about that?
Yes, sir. Thank you for that.
So I got to get your perspective on the Sixers before we get to the NBA Finals, because they hired Doc Rivers, and this is arguably the highest profile hire that they've had as a head coach since Larry Brown was in town. And I want to know from you, what does Doc Rivers initially coming to the Sixers mean for an organization that just a few years ago was in the midst of the process and now where they are moving forward?
A guy that's not a pushover, a guy that's going to command most from his personnel on the court, and a guy who is more resumed as an NBA champion and a former player, that even if they don't remember him as a player, their parents do. And Doc Rivers, to me, was an excellent hire. Ty Lue and Jason Kidd were dreams, but Mike D'Antoni almost did become the head coach of the Philadelphia 76ers, and Doc Rivers being fired made him readily available. And we have to call him Glenn. He's not Doc. The only Doc in town is Dr. J, Julius Erving. So I got to get used to calling him Glenn. I remember when he played for the Knicks, but I think it's an excellent hire. I think Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid will identify with him if both are still intact when the regular season, the 2020-2021 NBA season resumes. And I like the hire. I'm interested to see who his assistant coaching staff will be, and it'll be interesting.
I know there's some reports out there that Alvin Gentry may be joining the staff, and that would be a huge get as well for the 76ers. Speaking of the team, one of the things that Coach Rivers said to the media yesterday I thought was very interesting was he said part of the reason he came here was because of who was here. And he mentioned Embiid and Simmons and Harris multiple times. What does it say to you that a guy with Rivers' pedigree, someone who has coached not one, not two, but 3 different franchises to the postseason, a guy like him to say, I'm here because of these people?
Well, I think one of the advantages instantaneously that happens in Philadelphia is that Tobias Harris is going to have an awesome season if he stays healthy. If you recall, Tobias comes from Doc Rivers' Clippers system and had one of his best seasons when he was traded before he was traded to Philadelphia in Los Angeles with the Clippers. So I find it interesting that he's there because I know that when Tobias found out that he was being traded, Doc Rivers reached out to him, and he had just finished watching a scary movie, and he felt like he was in a nightmare because it felt like it was the extension to the scary movie that he had watched. He found out late at night on the road that he was traded, so he gets to be reunited with his coach. Elton has been coached. Elton Brand, the Sixers general manager, has been. Doc Rivers has coached against him. I'm not sure if their paths met at the point early in. I think Doc was retired by the time Elton came in, but I'm sure their NBA paths have crossed. Elton being from Peekskill, New York, growing up watching Doc Rivers when he played for the New York Knicks. But I also just think that he's somebody that people respect. I mean, people are upset about the 3-1 lead that Denver had. But I just think that Clippers team was an anomaly, particularly because of the personnel that they had. And I think that they're trying to get a name to kind of progress in a way that possibly Doc lost control in Los Angeles, and he had been there so long. But I think in Philadelphia, it's a fresh start. I also think that when you look at the 76ers, they are not done dealing and making moves. And I think, as I told you when I was on your show last time, when you asked me about Brett Brown, I didn't think that Brett was going to last. I wasn't wrong. And so how you're looking at the draft and you're looking at what's to come ahead, particularly with moves and free agency next month, there's a lot of things that can happen. I talk about Tobias Harris in Philadelphia with Doc Rivers. As I have reported since Labor Day weekend, Chris Paul is on a list of about 7 or 8 teams who have preliminary interest. Chris Paul currently plays for the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Knicks, the Sixers, the Jazz, the Nuggets, the Pelicans, the Phoenix Suns, and I may be missing a couple of teams, but you can check my Twitter account at Twitter or at ScoopB on Twitter. But how cool would it be if there was a reunion of some sorts in Philadelphia with Chris Paul and Doc Rivers running the show? So a lot to be paying attention to in order for that to happen. There would probably have to be some sort of draft day deal, 3-team trade that can be amended somewhere in between the Timberwolves, the Warriors, the Sixers, and the Toronto Raptors. So we'll see what happens. But Doc Rivers, the news is today in Philadelphia, he is now the head coach of the Philadelphia 76ers.
I'm going to grab something specifically you said and bring it back here because you said something I've been saying for a couple weeks now. I know there's a lot of Sixer fans who have gone on to the trade machines and on the different websites, and they've done their own calculations. Well, this is how you trade Al Horford. And I keep saying to people, you're not making those kind of moves unless you get a third or fourth team, because Al Horford, I'm sorry, he's not a young 33, and he's a guy that, let's be realistic, they made a mistake. And if you're bringing in someone like Glenn Doc Rivers to be the head coach, you got to give him the best possible roster. And I'm not calling to break up Ben and Joel, but I'm saying if you're going to make upgrades to this team, Horford's probably going to be one of the pieces that has to be moved. And it's very infrequently are you going to be able to move a contract like that for a one-on-one.
Yeah, I thought that at the end of the day, in answer to your question, it's not just the Al Horford conundrum. Well, the Al Horford conundrum can span from anything from legitimately conversations with Sacramento as it relates to Buddy Hield, who wants out, to, a lot of that has to do with Sacramento with the fact that Vlade Divac is no longer there, and Buddy and Vlade had a relationship, and Vlade's gone. I know that there's a restructure in Sacramento with Joe Dumars, and it's likely he'll have more of a hands-on front office approach after the search committee finishes their conclusive search, if you will. But Al Horford was overpaid. I've had that conversation with people within the Sixers and have said it to their face during the season. So anything I'm saying, I wouldn't, it's not something that I haven't said publicly. I think they did overpay for Al Horford, but at the same time, I think when you look at what happened at the end of last season with Jimmy Butler being gone now, remember the Heat, and you look at J.J. Redick, they were only able to retain Tobias Harris, and you have fillers like Furkan Korkmaz and Tobias Harris, as well as Al Horford trying to fulfill a role that was great with Jimmy Butler, JJ, and all those other pieces. I think the Sixers had a better team last year. I think there's a level of commitment that they have to make to sell the Sixers fan base that they could be as good as they were. I mean, this is a Sixers team that was close to going to the NBA Finals had Kawhi Leonard not hit that big shot against them in the playoffs last season. And then you go into this season where there were even more expectations. I mean, the Sixers were talked about in some circles in the same breath as in the Eastern Conference in the same breath that the Milwaukee Bucks were. And the Milwaukee Bucks undersold too. So you go into an Eastern Conference next season where now you have Brooklyn in the mix, assuming Kyrie and KD stay healthy. You have the Bucks who are looking to make moves in this offseason. Chris Paul is an interest of the Bucks as well. And he is on Giannis Antetokounmpo's list. So the Eastern Conference could get that much more difficult. So to me, the Sixers can't be done dealing. And you've heard after the playoffs, their exit interviews, guys saying there needs to be more accountability. I do think that Glenn Doc Rivers is the guy for that. But I think at the same time, a lot of it has to do with conditioning. People have talked about how they feel Joel Embiid came back, out of shape this summer, or I'm used to saying summer, this fall going into the winter and spring, whenever they resume next season, should be dedicated to making sure because with Doc Rivers' system, you're going to run, but you're also going to play in the half court. And you got to have premium shooters. This is why I'm kind of disappointed that J.J. Redick is not still a Sixer because he'd flourish in Doc Rivers' system. He did it in Los Angeles with the Clippers. But I do like the move with Doc Rivers, but unfortunately, coaches don't play on the floor. The players do.
NBA insider Brandon ScoopB Robinson joining us here on the Boardwalk on the hotline here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Make sure you're following on Twitter at ScoopB for all your NBA insights. You mentioned a man, Jimmy Butler, a little bit earlier. And the more I watch Jimmy, and not just in these NBA Finals, but the entire playoff run here, all I keep thinking of is there a better fit than Jimmy Butler than with Heat culture? I mean, Pat Riley's been trying to cultivate this Heat culture thing for what seems like to be 2 decades now, right? And he finally found a guy that's the closest thing to the grit and grind guy that he had when he had guys like Dwayne Wade and Alonzo Mourning back in the day. And now he's got it in a new form in Jimmy Butler. And by the way, this is the first NBA Finals the Miami Heat have ever been to without a man named Dwayne Wade on the roster.
Yeah, I think when you look at the Sixers, I'm so used to saying the Sixers. When you look at Jimmy Butler and the Heat, he's the perfect Dwayne Wade replacement. Jimmy wanted a team of his own. I think that Minnesota was a team full of young guys that were still finding their way. The Sixers were similar, except a lot more mature, in my opinion. And I think that Jimmy is an old soul that is an outlier in today's NBA and is a throwback to a 90s era, 80s era, 70s era of just hard-nosed, no nonsense. And I think that's why him coming out of, Tom Thibodeau's system back in Chicago with the Derrick Roses, with the Joakim Noahs of the world, Taj Gibsons, etc. I think he is a bag of M&Ms and a world full of Twizzlers. And in my mind, that makes sense. And I think that level of just being the outlier and being different on a young team that has some seasons that is going to work. And I'll be honest with you, the Lakers have a 2-1 lead in the finals right now. I think many people thought that it was over, that the Lakers should have been up 3-0. And even, let's say hypothetically, right, say the Heat don't win because the Heat still have a chance. This is an excellent recruiting tool to attract pieces this offseason and when the trading moratorium is lifted. There are players like the Victor Oladipos who have been tied to the Miami Heat for some time, whether it's when he becomes an unrestricted free agent after the 2020-2021 season, as well as Giannis Antetokounmpo as well. Again, I mentioned the NBA's Eastern Conference. The Miami Heat is another team who made it to the Eastern Conference Finals and won and made it to the NBA Finals. And, they have nothing but accolades to hang their hat on. Say they win. That's even more attraction. They have cap space. They have a star in Jimmy Butler who's going to hold you accountable. The same thing he's done since his Philadelphia and Minnesota days, I think Jimmy Butler is shutting a lot of people up who thought that he was wasting people's time by, deciding to leave Philadelphia. He wanted out, and he found greener pastures, and you got to take your hat off to somebody who did it his way. Frank Sinatra did it his way. Jimmy Butler did it his way. There you go.
On the other side, you have LeBron James. How important is this NBA Finals to LeBron James?
I think as much as it's assumed that Anthony Davis will resign, I think this is his window to get it before it gets a little bit more difficult, particularly in the NBA's Western Conference. The Clippers are coming back. The Nuggets, we know what we've identified them the last two playoffs, last season and this season. The Warriors are going to be healthier. And you still have some of the other teams that are out there. You have the Rockets, you have the Blazers. But this is the window for LeBron and Anthony Davis to get it because it doesn't get any easier next year. The Eastern Conference gets tougher next year. So I think that for LeBron's sake, they got to close it out. But I think at the same time, here's your chance. You went out and got Anthony Davis. You signed you signed Clutch. You got KCP. You brought in Rondo. Rondo wants to. I spoke to a league source today that said when Rondo's done, he wants to coach immediately after retirement. I don't know if that's this season or when, but the point I'm making is LeBron has all the personnel. He and his team have to close it. There's no excuses because if it doesn't happen, then you're going to start talking. Is Frank Vogel going to be gone? Does Jason Kidd come in and replace Frank Vogel? There are some other coaching candidacies out there. Phil Handy is an assistant coach with the Lakers who, has interests from teams to be, lead assistant coach. The Brooklyn Nets are a team that are interested in Phil Handy, as well as Kyrie Irving's godfather, Rod Strickland, who coached at Kentucky, I think John Calipari. But to your question about the Lakers, they got to close it because this has ramifications for other things. Dwight Howard should be due another payday because of his resurgence this season. So they have the personnel, they have the chemistry. They got to go out and finish what they started.
Of course, the NBA Finals game for tonight, a lot of eyeballs will be on that. And for all your news and information, like you just heard with all those names being dropped, who could be going where, you only can get that from at ScoopB on Twitter, ScoopB Radio, the podcast on all your platforms. And as all guests, NBA insider Brandon ScoopB Robinson joined us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. My friend, always appreciate the time. And just FYI, my favorite Jay-Z album is Blueprint 3.
Yeah, that was a good album. You had New York, New York. You had Every Day a Star is Born, excuse me. A lot of good tracks on that album. My favorite couple of albums are the first one. I also like the Black Album, and I like Blueprint too.
Gotcha. All right, my friend, good catching up. Well, I'm sure we'll be talking soon.
My brother, thank you for allowing me to be myself.
Absolutely. Again, follow him on Twitter at ScoopB on Twitter for all your NBA insight and analysis. His appearance here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN being brought to you by GMS Law. Make the right call with 4 convenient locations to serve you. Visit them online at gmslaw.com. Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, the PlaySugarHouse.com text board is open, 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation right here on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app powered by First Bank of Seattle City.
Now, more Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Game Night here on 97.3 ESPN. Thanks again to NBA insider Brandon ScoopB Robinson jumping on the show. A lot of great factoids and information in that conversation. By the way, if you ever miss any of Game Night's shows, interviews, conversations, my Friday football picks, and more, you can go check out the podcast over at 97.3ESPN.com and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app. Don't forget, still to come, about 10 minutes from now, we'll give you the final Sports Bash cash keyword of the day. And we got Yankees tonight. Coverage begins at 7 p.m. here on sorry, at 7:45 here on 97.3 ESPN. 7 p.m. tomorrow night, 7:45 tonight. Trying to keep my days straight here. I think the only reason why I know what day is to the next is because of sports. If it wasn't for sports, I'm not fully sure if I would know what day it is half the time. Just because 2020's been that bonkers. But tonight, Yankees, 7:45. Coverage begins tomorrow night, 7 o'clock. Yankees, Rays, games 2, game 3, game 2 tonight, game 3 tomorrow night. All the coverage right here on 97.3 ESPN. And don't forget, like I said, Sports Bash Cash. Final word of the day today, coming up at 6:55. Then we resume with more words. 10 words every day, 10 chances for you every single day to win Sports Bash Cash. And of course, that's brought to you by Jersey Shore Federal Credit Union, now in the Peachtree Plaza in Hamilton. 609-403-0973, the PlaySugarHouse.com text board. 609-403-0973. You know, looking around, as I mentioned earlier before we hit the break about the NFL, you know, I think sometimes it's a natural instinct for a lot of us to have opinions, have critiques about the teams in your own backyard, the teams that are very near and dear to your heart, without having the perspective of the rest of the NFL or the rest of the NBA or the rest of the NFL or the NHL. And I think sometimes we get so obsessed as human beings that the grass is greener on the other side, that when we reach the other side of the fence, we realize the grass isn't greener. It's just how it happened to be on the shine of the sun on that grass in front of us from the angle we were looking at it from. I think there's an attitude, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't criticize coaches or players, because I'm not saying that at all. Frankly, I think that there are times that we're not critical enough of certain players and coaches, and that we're also too critical of other players and coaches. There's a bit of a double standard at times when it comes to the criticism of these players and coaches. But you know, when we have conversations here on 97.3 ESPN, whether it's myself or Hunter Brody or Mike Gill or Billy Schweim or anybody here on the air on 97.3 ESPN, one of the things that gets overlooked at times is the reality that when you think about, I don't like this, or the guy's doing this, or this is a problem, sometimes those statements are made without the context, the understanding of the league as a whole. There's a perception, ever since Jim Schwartz became the defensive coordinator here in Philadelphia, that there is some other better, greater, more substantive D coordinator out there for the Eagles, and when there really isn't. There's this attitude that Carson Wentz is the only person committing turnovers or making mistakes. There's a perception at times that Doug Peterson is the only offensive play caller who has brain farts, right? There's a perception that Nick Gary is the only poor linebacker, from people's perception, who is a starting linebacker in the NFL. And I think that reality of the grass is not always greener on the other side of the fence became very evident last night when you were watching the 2 Monday night games. You watch the 2 Monday night games, you see what happens when your quarterbacks are Brian Hoyer and Jared Stidham. You find out very quickly when one official's call doesn't go your way. It swings the entire tide of a game. Makes you a little bit more grateful for what you have, right? How about the Falcons? The Falcons don't just have their entire starting secondary injured now. They also have a good portion of their backups injured as well. I mean, you're talking about when KZ went down yesterday, I'm looking at the list they put on the television of Denard, guys like Terrell, who's out with COVID-19. You have, all these different guys, Neal, all these guys. I'm thinking, my goodness, half their defense is injured. As I said, there is a perception at times that the Eagles or the Phillies or the Sixers or Flyers or something. And it's not that we shouldn't criticize them. It's that we have to do it within context. Jim Schwartz is a good defensive coordinator. Doug Peterson is a good NFL coach. Carson Wentz is a starting NFL quarterback and a solid one who's made a lot of mistakes in recent weeks. The reality is in front of us. It's just sometimes we don't always want to accept that reality put in front of us. 609-403-0973. Also, you heard ScoopB mention about the fact that, Jimmy Butler is we talk about how he's a perfect fit for the Heat. And it's not that the Sixers are better off without Jimmy Butler, but Jimmy Butler leaving allowed the 76ers to look at themselves hard in the mirror. I think losing sometimes allows you to take a step back and reevaluate in ways that success and winning does not. Because if you have too much success and too much winning and not enough adversity and not enough things going sideways or wrong, you have a tendency to get complacent. And I think for the 76ers organization, who's now on their third GM, there is something to be said for the fact that they had to take a hard evaluation of what has happened over the last few years. And whether the ownership wants to admit it or not, they have made mistakes along the way. And the goal of when you make a mistake is to learn from it. And now part of learning from it is you brought in a guy like Glenn Doc Rivers, who can come in here and be a presence, be a voice, be someone who is more than just another member of the organization. So when we can have conversations, when we can talk about what is this or what is that, you are going to have a stronger voice in the room. And I think a stronger voice is necessary. And I really do hope they hire Alvin Gentry as the offensive guy, because Alvin Gentry did some pretty incredible things offensively in his coaching career. He hasn't been the greatest head coach, but he knows how to maximize the offensive talent of many players. We've seen that in everywhere he's been. When he was in New Orleans, when he's been on Doc's staff in Los Angeles, when he was the head coach with the Suns. Alvin understands offense. It's just defense is not his forte. But if you're asking him to come in here and just oversee the offense, I'm down with that. 609-403-0973 for the PlaySugarHouse.com text board. Dan from EHT chimes in. He says, how can the Eagles be depleted in talent and or injuries for the third straight year? Actually, even their Super Bowl year. Well, I'll tell you how, Dan. It's two things. I think one of the reasons why, when it comes to the injuries, is because if you look at some of the players that are getting injured, they themselves have histories of injuries, right? It's not like Jason Peters has been the epitome of health, or Carson Wentz has been the epitome of health, or remember Ryan Matthews when they signed him, or Jay Ajayi. A lot of these guys had injury issues. That's part of the reason why you were able to get your hands on them to bring them in here. So you take a risk. You roll the dice. And what happened? They rolled the dice in 2017, and they had injuries, but they had just enough healthy guys to get them through and win a championship. And since then, some of the rolls of the dice have not worked out so well. Ronald Darby, for example. You rolled the dice, didn't work out so well. So I think that's part of the reason, not the whole reason, but part of the reason. The other thing with the Eagles when it comes to the talent is there's obviously a tug of war of power when it comes to that organization. There's a lot of rumors that, Jeffrey Lurie, he may have said, hey, this is who I think the Eagles should draft, or I like this player, or this is the player I sign off on. There's other rumors that Joe Douglas was running certain aspects of the draft, and he really pushed hard for guys like Derek Barnett and Donnell Pumphrey, right? Or that Andre Dillard with a Joe Douglas draft pick. So you could argue that for the Philadelphia Eagles, part of the problem and the reason why they are where they are is because of the fact that, maybe there's not enough clarity in terms of who's making the decisions in the organization. Sports Bash Cash, final keyword of the day. Stones. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, right? Stones. The Rolling Stones. STONES. That's your Sports Bash keyword. Take that to 973ESPN.com or the 973 ESPN mobile app for your chance to win up to $10,000. Sports Bash keyword being brought to you by Jersey Shore Federal Credit Union, now in the Peachtree Plaza in Hamilton. Your word is stones, plural. Next word coming up tomorrow morning at 9:55 a.m. I'm Josh Hennig. This is Game Night. Have a good night.